There is a strange thing that happens when you go back and rewatch a show you spent 11 years arguing about on the internet. You remember exactly who you disliked. You just can't always remember why. That's the feeling I want to sit with tonight. The Walking Dead ran long enough that the audience's opinion of a character and the character's actual behaviour on screen slowly drifted apart into two completely separate documents. People got written off in their first episode and spent 6 seasons trying to climb back out. Other people got a free pass they hadn't really earned. So this is a slow wander through the characters everyone was wrong about. Some were hated and then quietly vindicated. Some were adored and probably shouldn't have been. And a few were treated like set dressing right up until the show revealed they'd been holding the whole thing up. If you enjoy this sort of thing, a subscribe helps more than you'd think. That's all I'll say about that. Right, let's start with the one that still winds people up. There's a scene at the quarry early on, before anything has really gone wrong for this group yet, where the women are doing laundry in the water and having a completely ordinary conversation about how much they miss their washing machines. Somebody mentions a coffee maker, somebody else mentions a Braun electric razor. It's a lovely little bit of writing, honestly, because it's one of the only moments in the entire series where the apocalypse is treated as an inconvenience rather than a horror. And Laurie Grimes is right there in the middle of it, scrubbing a shirt, chatting away. That's the version of her I'd forgotten. I'd remembered the arguments. I'd remembered the shouting matches in the farmhouse. I had somehow filed away an entire character as the one who nags Rick, which, when you actually go back and watch it, is a fairly astonishing thing to have done. Because she's in maybe 60% of the scenes I'd mentally assigned to her, and in the other 40, she's doing something completely reasonable that I'd apparently decided not to notice. Let's start with the thing everybody brings up, which is Shane. The timeline here matters more than people give it credit for, so let's be precise about it. Rick is shot in the line of duty. He goes into a coma. Shane goes to the hospital to try to get him out, sees what he believes is the military executing patients in the corridors, and makes a judgment call that his best friend is already dead. He blocks the door and he leaves. Then he collects Laurie and Carl and gets them out of Atlanta, which is being firebombed by the American military at the time. This is not a woman who wandered off during a rough patch. This is a woman who was told by the person she trusted most in the world that her husband was dead, in a week where the government was dropping ordnance on its own cities. And she believed him, which, given the circumstances, seems like a reasonable thing to have done. Then Rick walks into camp, alive, and she has about 4 seconds to reorganize her entire life. That's it. 4 seconds. Nobody handles that gracefully, and the show doesn't pretend she does. She's cold to Shane, then cruel to Shane, then guilty about being cruel to Shane, and the whole thing curdles into the mess that drives most of season 2. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you she was written brilliantly, because she wasn't always. Season 2 had problems that had nothing to do with any individual character, but the specific charges people brought against her have not aged well at all. The big one was Carl. She loses track of Carl repeatedly, and this became the shorthand for her entire character. Terrible mother. Can't watch her own kid. And it's true, she does lose track of him. Here's the thing though. Across those same episodes, Rick is off searching for a missing girl, or negotiating with Herschel, or driving to a bar in town to have a philosophical debate with a stranger. And Carl is equally not being supervised by him. Nobody built a forum thread about that. Sarah Wayne Callies, who played her, has been fairly direct about this over the years, and I think her read is the correct one. She's described the reaction as an education in gender, essentially, that Laurie copped the criticism for parenting decisions Rick was never once judged for, because the underlying assumption was that the child was her job and the world was his. She's also pointed out that Rick is the one who is continually leaving, and Laurie is the one staying behind trying to keep a camp functioning, and yet the leaving read as heroic and the staying read as nagging. She's mentioned getting thousands of letters too, from all over the place, people writing to thank her for playing a woman who wasn't soft or decorative or easy to like, so the hate was never universal, it was just louder. There's an interview where she describes people walking up to her in the street, complete strangers, in the middle of an ordinary day, and telling her they hated her. Not the character, her. And her response was essentially, right, well, who raised you? Introduce yourself first, which I think is the single most reasonable thing anyone in this fandom has ever said. And here's a detail I rather love. She said she deliberately went looking for a role like that. She'd come off Prison Break, where she'd played someone the audience adored, and she'd decided that being universally liked was a trap for an actor, because you start quietly bending your performance to keep it. So she wanted a character who wasn't an uncontested good. She got one. Mission accomplished, as she put it. Now, if all this feels familiar, that's because it is. The comparison people always reach for is Skylar White from Breaking Bad, and it's a fair one. Same era, same pattern, same thing, where the wife of the protagonist becomes the lightning rod for an audience that has decided to root for a man doing questionable things. Anna Gunn wrote an entire opinion piece about it. There were forums, actual organised forums. It happened often enough in that stretch of television that people started naming it, and once you've got a name for a pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. I'm not going to pretend Laurie made only good decisions. She didn't. She tells Rick, more or less, that Shane is a problem that needs solving, and then acts horrified when he solves it. That's genuinely bad behaviour, and the show knows it. She's also the one pushing Rick toward the harder version of leadership, right up until she gets the harder version of leadership, and finds she doesn't like the look of it. But those are the flaws of a person, not the flaws of a badly conceived character. She's inconsistent in the way that frightened people are inconsistent. The pregnancy is the part I'd most completely forgotten, and it's the strongest material she gets. She works out she's pregnant somewhere around the farm, and she does not know whose it is. That's the whole situation in one sentence. She's in a field with no doctor, no scan, no way of finding out, and the two candidates are her husband and the man who has just started behaving like a threat to him. So she sends Glenn into town for morning after pills, which is a small, awful, extremely practical scene. A teenager on a supply run with a shopping list he isn't supposed to read. And then she takes them. And then she makes herself sick bringing them back up. And she's kneeling in the dirt in the dark, trying to undo a decision she made about 20 minutes earlier. Nobody talks about this scene. I've read a dozen ranking articles about this character, and I've never seen it come up once. It's a woman having the most difficult, private argument available to a person, twice, in the space of an hour, in a field, and the takeaway the internet arrived at was that she was annoying about her son. There's also the business with the walker in the RV, and the car crash on the road to town, and the fact that she drives out alone to fetch Rick back because nobody else will. She is not passive. She's just rarely doing the thing the camera is currently pointed at. And the argument she has with Rick after Shane dies is, I think, the best written exchange of the first 3 seasons. She told him to handle it. He handled it. And she finds she cannot look at him. That's not hypocrisy played for cheap drama. That's someone discovering the difference between wanting a problem gone and watching a person be made gone. Then there's how it ends in an episode called Killer Within, and I still think it's the most upsetting thing the show ever did in its first 3 years. She goes into labour in a boiler room in a prison during an attack. There's no doctor, there's no time, there's a teenager with a knife and her 12-year-old son. And she talks Maggie through a cesarean section with no anaesthetic, knowing exactly what that means for her, and then says goodbye to Carl in a way that is so specific and so plainly written that I've never been able to watch it twice in a row. Callies has spoken about the criticism that it was a selfish decision, saddling Rick with 2 children, and dismissed it fairly briskly. The character was bleeding out either way. There was no version of that scene where she walks out of the room. What she chose wasn't death over life, it was the baby over nothing. What strikes me most on a rewatch is how much the show missed her afterwards. Not emotionally, though there's plenty of that, with Rick and the phone, and the whole business with the hallucinations. I mean structurally. Laurie was the only adult in that group willing to tell Rick he was wrong to his face and keep telling him. Carol eventually inherits some of that. Michonne inherits more of it later, but there's a long gap in the middle where nobody is standing in front of Rick saying no, and the show is visibly worse for it. Even Stephen Yeun once admitted at a convention panel that he'd hated the character reading the comics before he ever got to the show, which tells you the reputation preceded her, and that a fair few people arrived at season 1 having already made up their minds. Anyway, I was on the wrong side of that one, and going back through it now is a mildly embarrassing experience. Not a dramatic revelation, just the low-level discomfort of finding out you'd been repeating something you never actually checked. That's a decent place to bring up the opposite case. Because while everybody was busy being furious about Laurie, there was a woman standing about 4 feet behind her in almost every scene, saying almost nothing, and nobody noticed her at all. Season 1 of this show has a particular texture to it. Everything's a bit grimy and washed out. The group is enormous, and half of them don't have surnames. And there's this constant low hum of people standing around a campfire trying to work out who's in charge. It's very much a show about a crowd. And in that crowd there is a small woman with cropped grey hair who barely speaks. Carol Pelletier gets introduced as somebody's wife. That's the whole brief. Her husband is a bully. Everyone at camp knows it. Nobody does anything about it until Shane does something about it with his fists. And even then, she asks him to stop. She has a daughter she can't protect. She has no skills the group values. She flinches when men raise their voices. If you'd asked anyone watching in 2010 which member of that camp would still be standing at the end, she would not have made anybody's list. Here's a fun bit of production trivia that I think about a lot. Melissa McBride wasn't a series regular until season 4. She'd been on the show since the 3rd episode ever made, and for 3 whole years she was contracted as a recurring guest, which in television terms means the show could have dropped her at any point without so much as a phone call. There's a version of this series where Carol dies at the farm and nobody outside the fandom ever mentions her again. The barn is where the character actually starts, though nobody realised it at the time. Half of season 2 is spent looking for Sophia. It's a search that goes on for 7 episodes, which is roughly half the season, and it's still regarded as one of the more frustrating stretches the show ever ran. People got very bored of it, and I understand why, structurally, but the reason it works at all is Carol standing at the edge of every scene, being told to stay behind while other people look for her daughter. Then the barn opens and Sophia walks out of it. The thing I always notice is that she doesn't run forward. She tries to, and Daryl grabs her, and she just collapses backwards into the grass and makes a sound that is not really acting so much as somebody deciding to open a door and let something out. Melissa McBride is doing something in that scene that you cannot teach. And then there's Lizzie and Mika later, which is the other half of the foundation. 2 girls she takes on after the prison falls. One of them is bright and gentle, and the other one has something profoundly wrong with her. And Carol spends weeks trying to convince herself it's manageable. It isn't. Lizzie kills her sister because she genuinely believes the dead are just people who have changed, and she wants to demonstrate it. She's waiting there with the knife and a proud expression when the adults come back. And Carol takes her out into a field and tells her to look at the flowers. I don't think this show ever did anything harder than that episode There's no villain in it. There's no fight. It's a woman working out that there is no version of the future in which this child is around other children, and then doing the thing herself rather than making Tyrese do it, because she has already decided that she's the one who carries this sort of thing. Which is why the later Carol makes sense to me even when it frustrates me. The competence people admire and the damage people got tired of are the same object viewed from two angles. The turn doesn't happen where people think it does, by the way. Everyone points to the moment she puts a bullet in a child, and yes, obviously, that's the crossing of a line. But I'd argue the actual pivot is earlier and much quieter. It's in the prison when a flu outbreak starts tearing through the population, and Carol works out that 2 people are already infected and that the whole community is going to die if it spreads. So she kills them and burns the bodies, alone, without asking anyone. It's a monstrous thing to do. It's also, on the information she had, a defensible piece of triage. And what fascinates me is that she doesn't agonize over it on screen at all. She tells Rick flatly, when he asks in a field, while they're gathering supplies. No preamble. Just yes, I did that. Rick exiles her for it, drives her out to a suburb, and leaves her there with a car, which is a decision I've never fully forgiven him for. And I don't think the show entirely forgives him either. And then, in the Season 5 premiere, an episode called No Sanctuary, the show does something structurally mad that I don't think it ever repeated. It ends Season 4 with the entire main cast locked in a train car at a cannibal compound, the most dire cliffhanger it had ever built. And then it resolves that cliffhanger with one supporting character walking in from outside and blowing the place up on her own. She's covered in walker guts. She's got a rifle. She detonates a propane tank and turns the whole compound into a slaughterhouse and walks out with everybody. It's an absurd sequence, and I love it unreservedly. There's a moment where Daryl just sprints at her and picks her up off the ground, and honestly, no notes. What she does next is the part I find genuinely clever though. When the group reaches Alexandria, a walled community full of people who have never seen anything, who still have functioning showers and neighbourhood potlucks, Carol looks at the situation, correctly identifies that these people are soft and possibly dangerous, and constructs a character to fool them. Cardigan, casserole, nervous laugh. She becomes somebody's mum. She joins the pantry rota. She volunteers for the church group. And the entire time she's mapping the armoury. It's the only time this show ever attempted anything close to an espionage plot. And it works because you've watched this woman for 5 years and you know exactly what's underneath the cardigan. There's a scene where a kid catches her stealing guns and she leans down and tells him, very gently, in a nice calm voice, that if he says anything, she'll tie him to a tree outside the walls. Nightmare fuel. Completely brilliant. Now, here's where this gets more complicated, and where I think we have to be honest, because everyone was wrong about Carol only tells half the story. The audience turned. Not all of it, and not permanently, but there was a real and sustained backlash to late series Carol that I don't think gets discussed as much as the earlier Vindication does. The trouble starts around season 6 and 7. Having become extremely good at killing people, she has a breakdown about having become extremely good at killing people, and she leaves. Then she comes back. Then she leaves again. She spends the kingdom years in a sort of semi-retirement, playing house with Ezekiel, and then Henry dies and she goes hunting Alpha, and then season 10 happens, and she spends most of it making increasingly self-destructive decisions and getting other people killed for them. The complaint, boiled down, was that it had become a loop. Grief, isolation, revenge, guilt, repeat. And I understand the fatigue, I really do. There's a version of that criticism that's completely fair, because the show did keep reaching for the same lever. But here's what makes it interesting to me. That exact arc, trauma, withdrawal, a revenge quest that endangers everyone, is not unique to her. Rick has it after Laurie, complete with hallucinations and a telephone. Daryl has it twice, Morgan has it so severely he gets an entire bottle episode about it. Every single one of those men came out the other side, with their popularity intact or improved. Hers was the one that got called self-indulgent. I'm not going to spell out why that pattern keeps turning up, because we've already been through it, and you can see the shape of it well enough from here. I'll just note that it's the same double standard wearing a different coat. There's also a structural problem the show created for itself in season 9, when it split the cast across 4 communities and gave Carol a crown and a small kingdom to run. It's a lovely idea on paper. In practice, it took the most interesting character on the show and made her a diplomat, which is a bit like winning a greyhound in a raffle and using it to guard your shed. The Daryl friendship deserves a note, since it's the longest continuous relationship in the whole franchise and one of the very few the show never turned romantic, despite an enormous amount of external pressure to do so. It starts at the farm, with him being the only person who takes the search for her daughter seriously and getting a horse thrown at him for it. It carries through everything: the prison, the exile, the reunion, the years apart at the kingdom, the falling out over Connie, the long silence, and eventually a woman flying to France on a repaired aircraft with a stranger because she'd got a bad feeling. And what I find quietly remarkable is that the show let it be difficult. They fall out properly. There's a stretch where they genuinely cannot be around each other, and neither of them handles it well. And it isn't resolved by a hug. It's resolved by time, and then by one of them getting on a plane. Fun detail, and one that I think explains the whole dynamic. He's the only person she never performs for. Every other relationship she has involves some amount of construction. The mouse, the housewife, the queen, the friendly new arrival. With him, she just says the thing. What I keep coming back to is that she outlasts almost everyone. Rick goes, Michonne goes, Maggie leaves and comes back, and Carol is still there at the end of it all. And then she's in France, of all places, riding a motorbike through Paris looking for Daryl, trading her way into a fascist compound because she reckons it's the fastest route to information, which, when you set it next to a woman flinching at a campfire in 2010, is one of the more complete transformations television has managed. Fun detail from that stretch, actually, and one I found weirdly touching. Somewhere in France, she starts dredging up her school French, and she mentions a teacher called Madame Bergeron, who used to wrap the students' knuckles with a ruler if they missed a verb ending. It's about 8 seconds of dialogue, but it's the first time in 14 years of this franchise that anyone bothered to give her a memory that wasn't about her husband or her daughter. She had a childhood. She had a globe next to the telly that she used to spin around thinking about all the places she'd go, and then she became a mother, and that was the world. Anyway, since we're talking about people who are underestimated, let's move on to the 2 men the audience didn't just underestimate, but actively wanted dead. Seth Gilliam received death threats over this role. I want to lead with that because I think people have forgotten how strange the temperature got around Father Gabriel. This is a man who has been in The Wire and Oz, a working actor with about 30 years of credits, and he took a job playing a frightened priest on a zombie show, and people sent him threats about it. That's the level we're operating at. So, the thing he did, the world ends. Gabriel is in his church, his congregation, his actual parishioners, people whose names he knew, people he'd married and buried family for, come to the doors at night looking for shelter, and he locks them out. He stands inside and listens to it happen. Later, when the group finds him, there's writing scratched into the outside wall of that church. You'll burn for this. Somebody stood out there in the dark with the dead coming and took the time to carve that into the wood. It is genuinely unforgivable. I'm not going to soften it. He didn't panic in a moment and get it wrong. He sustained a decision over hours. Here's my problem with how the fandom handled it, though. Gabriel did one appalling thing off screen before we met him, and then spent 6 seasons visibly paying for it. Meanwhile, this show is stuffed with people who did far worse on camera and got forgiven inside a season and a half. There is a fairly straightforward hierarchy of who gets forgiven in this fandom, and it lines up suspiciously well with who can handle a weapon. Because that's the real crime, isn't it? He was useless. He couldn't fight. He cried a lot. He undermined Rick in front of the Alexandrians. He told Deanna that these people were dangerous. He had that whole awful business goading Sasha at the worst possible moment in her life. He was a liability, and this is a show where being a liability is the one sin that actually matters. The theories got quite mad for a while. There was a persistent, widely held fan belief that Gabriel was secretly working for the Saviours. Not as a joke, people built cases, and when the Season 8 premiere put him in a trailer with Negan, half the internet went, "There it is, we told you." What actually happened in that trailer is one of my favourite two-handers in the whole series. They're trapped, they're surrounded, and Gabriel spends the episode getting Negan to talk about his wife, and Negan, who is not a man who does confession, does something extremely close to it. The priest gets the villain to open up in a metal box full of Walker guts. It's a lovely bit of irony, and the show plays it completely straight. From there, he just keeps going. He loses his sight for a while, which is a hell of a thing to hand a character whose entire arc is about what he refused to see. He becomes one of the effective leaders of Alexandria. He and Rosita have a child. And in the finale of the flagship show, when the Commonwealth is collapsing under Pamela Milton, he's the one standing at the gates. Here's a comparison I find genuinely interesting. In the comics, Gabriel's arc barely exists. He starts to change. There's a moment where he lets Eugene and Nicholas into the church during a herd, which is the mirror image of his original sin, and then he falls off a ladder and gets killed by Beta and Walkers, more or less out of nowhere. Robert Kirkman had the idea, and then closed the book on it. The show looked at that and thought, no, there's more here, and a lot of that is down to Gilliam, who plays him with this permanent flicker of somebody negotiating with himself. He was invited back for a guest spot in The Ones Who Live years later, turning up in flashbacks with Jadis, which is not something you do with a character nobody cares about. One more detail before we move on, because it's the sort of thing this show did well, when it was paying attention. Above the doors of that church there's a sign, St. Sarah's, and underneath it the phrase about sanctuary for all. It stays there the entire time he's living inside the building he wouldn't open. Nobody in the script ever points at it. It's just there in the background of every establishing shot, quietly doing its job. There's also the night he goes out into the dark with a machete, wanders into the woods, and more or less invites the walkers to have him. He can't do it, obviously. He comes back and rings the bell and hides under the floor. But it tells you the man had been carrying an active death wish for a long stretch of his screen time. And a fair chunk of the audience read all that flinching as weakness rather than as someone who quite openly wanted to be finished. And the Sasha business, which is the worst thing he does on camera. She's just lost Bob, and then Tyrese in short order, and she is not remotely stable. And Gabriel, who has correctly worked out that she wants to die too, goads her about it in the middle of a graveyard because misery wants company. It's a genuinely nasty scene. He apologises later, at length, and she is much more generous about it than I would have been. Right. Eugene. Eugene Porter arrives in Season 4 with a bowl cut, a mullet, an enormous vocabulary, and a claim that he is a scientist with knowledge of what caused the outbreak, and that if he can get to Washington, he can end it. He's got 2 people escorting him across the country on that basis. Abraham has attached his entire remaining will to live to it. None of it is true. He's a high school science teacher. He made it up because he did the maths on his own survival value, correctly concluded it was approximately 0, and manufactured some. And people despised him for it, which I've always found a bit rich, honestly, because I'd argue it's the most human thing anybody does in the first 5 seasons. He didn't have a skill, so he invented one. He is functionally a man who lied on his CV during the apocalypse. What I like is that the show makes him admit it himself, out loud, in the road, to Abraham's face. He says he's a coward. He says he lied, and Abraham beats him half to death for it, which is fair enough, and then can't quite bring himself to leave him behind. Then he does it again. The saviors take Alexandria and Eugene, faced with a man who will absolutely kill him. Defects, properly defects. He starts making bullets for Negan. He's given a room and a job title. He calls himself Negan in the lineup. This earned him a second, angrier round of hatred, and this time I understand it better, because the first lie hurt nobody, and this one gets people killed. But watch what he's actually doing in that period. He's making bullets, yes. He's also the man who works out how to make the ammunition fail, and when Rosita and Daryl come to break him out, he refuses, which reads like cowardice at the time, and reads like something else entirely, once you know he was already running his own quiet sabotage. The last stretch is the one I think people sleep on. He builds radios. He teaches himself to fight badly at first, and then adequately, which for Eugene is an enormous distance travelled. He starts talking to a woman on the radio and falls for a voice, which is such a specific and slightly pathetic thing to do that it becomes completely endearing. And then he goes to the Commonwealth on the strength of it, gets used, gets betrayed, and stands up in a courtroom and dismantles the whole thing. Fun detail on the divergence from the source. In the comics, Eugene and Rosita end up together romantically. The show quietly declined to do that, gave Rosita a completely different set of relationships, and left Eugene in a long, unrequited holding pattern instead. It's a small change that alters the shape of him enormously. Comic Eugene gets the girl and settles. Show Eugene has to work out who he is without her, which is harder and, I'd argue, better. Josh McDermott deserves more credit than he gets for the speech patterns, incidentally. Eugene talks in this dense, over-engineered register. Everything is a compound clause, nothing is one syllable when four will do, and it never once collapses into a catchphrase. It's a defense mechanism, dressed up as vocabulary. A man building a wall out of words because he hasn't got any other building materials. There's a small moment I'm fond of, from the road, before anyone knows he's lying. He's asked to take a turn on watch, and he fires a rifle at some walkers and puts a bullet straight through the fuel tank of the vehicle they're all depending on, strands the entire group. And his explanation is essentially that he has never been trained, has never claimed to be trained, and that everyone had simply decided he must be competent because he sounded like it, which is, when you think about it, the entire character in one sentence, delivered about 6 episodes before the reveal. The Stephanie material is the bit that made me actively fond of him. He builds a radio, starts talking to a woman he has never seen, and constructs an entire relationship out of nightly conversations about nothing. And when it becomes clear he's been talking to someone using a false name for reasons of her own, that the person on the other end was doing a job, he doesn't rage about it. He works out that she was also just a person who was frightened and improvising. Man spent his whole run being lied about and lying, and ended up the most straightforward person in the room. So you've got 2 men here who both start from the same position, no combat value, a shameful thing in the past, an audience that wants them gone, and both end up load-bearing. And that brings us on to 2 characters the show killed off before the audience ever got the chance to change its mind. Both of these women were judged against a version of themselves that only existed in someone else's head, which is a rough deal for anybody. Start with Andrea, because the gap there is enormous. If you've read the comics, Andrea is one of the pillars. She's the best shot in the book by a distance. She's Rick's partner for a long stretch of it, and she survives an absurdly long time, well past the point where the show had run out of story for her. Comic readers arrived at the television series with that fully installed in their expectations. This is the sniper. This is the one who lasts. Show Andrea dies at the end of season 3, which means every single thing she did in those 3 years was being marked against a scorecard she didn't know existed. She wasn't underperforming as a character. She was being compared to a stranger. And the actual character on screen is far more interesting than the reputation, especially early. There's a moment at the CDC, right at the end of season 1, where the building is going to incinerate itself, and Andrea decides she'd rather stay. Her sister is dead. She has just spent days waiting beside her sister's body for her to reanimate so she could put her down herself, which is possibly the bleakest vigil this show ever staged. And she sits down in that room and says, "No, actually, I'm done." Dale won't leave without her. He sits down next to her and makes it her problem. Either she comes out, or he burns with her and she comes out. And she is absolutely furious about it. And she's right to be. The whole argument between them afterwards is about whether an adult woman gets to make a decision about her own life, or whether the men around her get to manage her into staying alive. That's a genuinely thorny piece of writing for a cable zombie show in 2011, and it establishes the thing that defines her. Andrea does not like being handled. Every subsequent bad decision she makes flows out of that, and I think it's much more coherent than she gets credit for. The Dale relationship is worth staying on, because it curdles in a way the show never quite acknowledges. He saves her life and then behaves as though that gives him a permanent stake in it. He takes her gun away. He gives it back and then hovers. He decides on her behalf which conversations she's ready for. And when she sleeps with Shane, which she does largely as an act of defiance, and partly because Shane is the only person in that camp treating her like an adult, Dale's disappointment is so heavy you can feel it through the screen. He means well. He always means well. But there's a whole strand of season 2 that's really about a young woman being fussed over by a man who cannot tell the difference between caring for someone and supervising them. And the show frames her irritation as the problem rather than his hovering. Then there's the shooting. She wants to learn, and she does learn, and she becomes properly good at it. Good enough that Shane takes her out for training and comes back respecting her. And then she shoots Daryl in the head. Grazes him, rather, mistaking him for a walker coming out of the tree line at dusk. It's an honest mistake in poor light, and it undoes about 4 episodes of hard-won credibility instantly. From that point on, whenever anyone in the group needs a shorthand for Andrea being reckless, that's the one they reach for. Then Woodbury. Let's be fair about the information available to her. She's been separated from the group through an entire winter. She has been sick and cold and dragged across a state by a woman with a sword who does not explain herself and does not do small talk. And then she arrives at a town with electricity and hot water and a doctor and people having barbecues in the street, run by a charming man in a cardigan who tells her she's welcome to stay. Michonne can smell it. Michonne is right, but Michonne cannot articulate why and won't, because that isn't how she's built at that point. So from Andrea's side of the room, the choice is between the functioning town and the silent stranger who wants to walk back into the woods. Everyone watching knew what the governor was, because we'd seen the aquarium of heads and the zombie daughter in the cupboard. She hadn't. That's not stupidity. That's just being a character in a show, with a camera that goes places you don't. Where I'll join the criticism is the back half of season 3, where the show keeps engineering reasons for her not to act. She has him asleep in front of her, with a knife within reach, and doesn't do it, and the writing has to tie itself in a knot to explain why. That's not a character failing, that's a plotting failing, and she takes the blame for it anyway. And then the ending, which I think is one of the more misjudged deaths in the run. She's tied to a chair with a set of pliers just out of reach, and a reanimating Milton in the room with her, and she almost gets out. Almost. It's cruel in a way that doesn't say anything, and after 3 seasons of being told she wasn't useful enough, she dies failing at a physical task by about 4 inches. Laurie Holden, for what it's worth, has always spoken about her fondly, and has been fairly clear that she'd have played her longer if the show had wanted it. Now Beth. The running joke about Beth Green for about 2 full seasons was that she was the farm girl who sang. That was it. That was the entire perceived function. She was a teenager in a cardigan with a nice voice who did the washing up at the prison and looked after the baby, and a substantial part of the audience regarded her as a resource drain with a subplot. I remember thinking that. I remember being wrong about it in real time and not noticing, which is a bit unfair even on its own terms, because the first properly serious thing she does is at the farm, and it's rough going. Her mother is in the barn. Her brother is in the barn. She watches the whole family come out and get shot in the space of about 90 seconds, and then she shuts down completely for a couple of episodes, and then she tries to kill herself. Maggie catches her at it, and what follows is a genuinely uncomfortable conversation about whether continuing is a choice you make once or a choice you make every morning, and Beth comes down on the side of every morning and then spends the next 2 seasons quietly being the person who decides that. That's not a passenger, that's somebody doing the hardest work available, off to one side while the camera is busy elsewhere. The washing up and the lullabies weren't the character. They were what the character had chosen to do with the decision. The episode that changes it is called Still, and it's the moonshine one, and it's one of the strangest hours the show ever made. It's Beth and Daryl and nothing else. No Walker set piece worth mentioning, no plot advancement, just 2 people breaking into a country club and then a shack and getting steadily drunk and having an argument that neither of them can win. She decides she wants a drink because she's never had one, and it's the end of the world, and her father is dead. He takes her out to find one, and the whole thing turns into her needling him about who he was before, and him exploding at her about what she doesn't understand, and then both of them burning down a house that represents something neither of them says out loud. Emily Kinney was a working musician before and after the show, which is why the singing never sounds like an actress being handed a song. It sounds like a person who sings. That's a small thing that makes an enormous difference. The scenes where she sings at the prison work, because they're not performances, they're just somebody filling a silence. After that, she's a different character entirely, and Grady Memorial is where she gets to prove it. Trapped in a hospital run by a police captain with a protection racket. No allies, no weapons, no leverage. And she works the room. She lies, she steals, she makes an alliance with the doctor. She kills a man, she gets somebody out. Then there's Coda and the scissors. I'm still not sure the show earned that ending, and I don't think I ever will be. The exchange is going fine. Everyone's about to walk away, and she takes a pair of scissors out of her cast and stabs a woman in the shoulder and gets shot in the head for it, and the entire rescue collapses into a corridor full of gunfire and Daryl carrying her out. The argument for it is that it's the last act of somebody who has finally decided she isn't going to be managed by anyone, which, funnily enough, is precisely the thing Andrea was arguing for at the CDC 3 seasons earlier. The argument against it is that it's a character behaving irrationally at the exact moment the plot requires a death. The lovely bit, though, is what the audience did with it afterwards, because they refused. There was a genuine, sustained, years-long fan movement built on the conviction that she was still alive, that the body was ambiguous, that Daryl's reaction was staged, that a coffin in a later season meant something. People were still finding evidence in season 9. There were petitions, and whatever you think about all that, consider what it means. A character the fandom had spent 2 seasons calling useless generated a multi-year refusal to accept her death. That's not nothing. Anyway, since we're on the subject of people who were right at the wrong time, let's talk about 2 men who both told the group exactly what was coming and got nothing for it. Here's a question I've never been able to answer to my own satisfaction. How many of Shane Walsh's actual positions did this show eventually adopt as policy? Because it's most of them. Let's go through it. Shane says the barn full of walkers on Herschel's farm is a threat, and that everybody knows the missing girl is dead. He's right on both counts. Shane says the group cannot indefinitely feed and shelter every stranger it picks up off the road without a serious conversation about risk. The show spends seasons 5 through 8 arriving at that same conclusion by a much longer route. Shane says that Randall, the boy from the rival camp, cannot be released and cannot be kept, and that pretending there's a third option is a comfortable lie. Rick agonizes about it for 2 episodes and then reaches Shane's conclusion anyway, just later and with more speeches. He is, more or less consistently, the man in the room who has already done the arithmetic that nobody else wants to do out loud. And by season 3, after Laurie, Rick has stopped putting anything to a vote. He says so himself, out loud, in the prison yard. That's Shane's argument winning about 6 months after Shane lost. So there's a reading of this character, quite a popular one, it resurfaces every couple of years, that says Shane was right all along, and the show punished him for being early. I'm not going to endorse it though. Because of Otis, everything above holds until you get to the school. Shane and Otis go out for medical supplies to save Carl's life. They're cornered, they're out of ammunition, they can't both make it back. And Shane shoots Otis in the leg and leaves him to be eaten so that he can get away with the bag. Then he comes back and tells the story with himself as the survivor of a tragedy, and he shaves his head so that the wound where Otis tore his hair out doesn't show. That's the detail that gets me, not the murder, the cover-up, the specific practical calculation of what a witness would notice. The show is very careful about this, and I think it's the best decision it made with him, because once you've seen the school, every subsequent Shane argument arrives with an asterisk. He may well be right about Randall. He is also a man who has demonstrated that when the arithmetic points at somebody else dying, he can do it and then eat dinner. John Bernthal plays him with this permanent low-frequency vibration, like a man standing slightly too close to you at a bar, and he's spoken about the character with real affection over the years. He's described him, roughly, as somebody who genuinely loved that family and was destroyed by the fact that loving them wasn't the same thing as being right for them, which is about the fairest summary anyone's managed. There's also a version of this where Shane is simply the first person to fully understand the new world, and the show hasn't got a use for someone who understands it that fast. He adapts in about a fortnight, everyone else takes years, and a man who has finished adapting while the people around him are still grieving their old lives is going to look like a monster, because from their side of it he is one. The friendship is the part that gets lost, and it's the reason any of it lands. They were partners, actual partners in a patrol car for years. The very first scene of the entire series is the two of them sitting in that car, eating fast food, and having a conversation about Rick's marriage, and Shane is giving him advice about it, and he means it kindly. He's also the one who put himself in front of Rick's hospital door. Whatever you make of the decision he came to, the version of events where Shane simply abandoned his friend to take his wife doesn't survive contact with what's on screen. He went back for him, he got it wrong, and then there's the episode where the two of them drive out to dump Randall somewhere far away, and the whole thing turns into a fight in a school car park. That's the one I'd point anyone to. They batter each other for about 4 minutes, and it isn't choreographed like a television fight. It's ugly and badly aimed, and they keep having to stop to breathe. Two men who have known each other for 15 years, wrecking a friendship in an empty building, while a boy they're arguing about is tied up in the boot. The line that sticks with me is Shane telling him that he's a good man, and that a good man is exactly the wrong thing to be now. He isn't sneering when he says it. He sounds sorry about it. His death is the one that nobody argues about, though. Rick stabs him. Carl shoots the reanimated version, and then it turns out he came back without being bitten, which is the reveal that reframes the entire series. Everyone's infected, everyone turns. The dead are not something that happens to you. They're something that's already happened. Fun detail. That reveal is delivered by Shane's corpse. The character spends 2 seasons saying the world has changed more than you're willing to admit, and then proves it by dying. Right. Morgan. Morgan Jones is the first living person Rick meets. Episode 1. He's in a house in a small Georgia town with his son. He's got a rifle, and his wife is outside walking the street with the rest of them. He explains the rules of the new world to a man who's just woken up from a coma, feeds him, and then can't bring himself to shoot his own wife through the window. And then he's gone for 3 seasons. When the show comes back to him, in an episode called Clear, he is not a person anymore. He's a man in a building full of traps, muttering, wearing the same clothes, having lost his son to the thing he couldn't do in that window. And the walls of that place are covered in writing, floor to ceiling, timelines, warnings, instructions to himself, the whole interior of a broken mind rendered in marker pen. It's the best episode about grief the show ever made, and it's essentially a 3-hander in a small town. What happens next is where the audience and I parted company for a good while. Morgan gets found by a man called Eastman, who teaches him Aikido and a philosophy. All life is precious, and Morgan comes out the other side, committed to not killing. At all. Under any circumstances. And I found it insufferable. I really did. Every time the saviours were about to do something appalling, there was Morgan with the stick, refusing to solve the problem, and I remember genuinely resenting the character for it. I've come round. Mostly because of what the show does with it, which is to demonstrate, patiently, and without ever letting him off the hook, that the doctrine is not a moral position at all. It's a load-bearing wall. Morgan doesn't refuse to kill because he thinks killing is wrong. He refuses because he knows exactly what he becomes once he starts. And he has been that thing already. And he is terrified of the version of himself that lives on the other side of that door. Which is why it collapses so completely when it collapses. He kills a saviour, and then another, and by the end of the war, he's back in the traps and mutterings territory, and he has to leave. And here's the part I like best. He leaves the show and becomes the lead of another one. Morgan Jones ends up carrying multiple seasons of Fear the Walking Dead, which means a character who was written as a 1-episode guest in the pilot outlasted almost the entire original cast in screen time. Lenny James got more mileage out of a man in a house with a rifle than anyone could reasonably have expected. The Eastman episode is the one I defend hardest actually, and it's called Here's Not Here. It's about 90 minutes long in its original broadcast. It stops the season 8-part way through a cliffhanger to tell an entirely separate story, and a lot of people were extremely annoyed about that at the time. It's a man in a cabin in the woods with a goat. He makes his own cheese. He has a cell built into the side of his house, which turns out to be for keeping people in until they calm down, and he keeps Morgan in it, with the door unlocked the whole time, because the point was never the lock. And the reason the philosophy has any weight at all is that Eastman is not a pacifist by temperament. He tells Morgan plainly that he once let a man starve to death in that cell deliberately over a very long time, for something he'd done to Eastman's family. He arrived at all life is precious from the far side of having done the worst thing he could think of, and finding it changed nothing, which puts the goat and the Aikido and the stick in a completely different light. It isn't gentleness. It's a man teaching another man a rule he needed himself. Anyway, let's move on to the people the show treated like furniture. Ensemble shows quietly designate certain characters as furniture. It isn't malicious, it's just triage. You've got 20 people on the call sheet, and 8 of them get an inner life, and the rest get a job. Stand there, hand somebody a rifle, say the line about the fence. What's unusual about this show is how often it promoted the furniture. Rosita Espinosa arrives in the same episode as Eugene and Abraham, and for an embarrassingly long time, the discourse around her was about her clothes. That's it. She was introduced in shorts and a crop top in the middle of Georgia in summer, and a substantial chunk of the audience decided that told them everything they needed to know about the character's depth. I've seen serious ranking articles where that's the entire entry, which is a shame. because if you actually track what she does, she's one of the most quietly competent people in the entire run. She can build a bomb. She speaks 4 languages. She works out how to make explosives out of scavenged parts because Abraham taught her some of it. And she taught herself the rest, and there's a lovely running idea in the character that she acquires skills by attaching herself to whoever has one and paying attention. The bit people miss is that this makes her deliberate. Rosita didn't survive by being tough. She survived by being an extremely fast study who understood very early that being useful was the only currency that mattered. Which, if you're keeping track, is exactly the problem Eugene tried to solve by lying. There's a detail I like about the languages, actually. She picks them up the same way she picks up everything else, from whoever's standing nearest. Some Spanish from home, some from Abraham. Bits of the rest from people she travelled with in the years before Alexandria. It's the same instinct as the bomb making. Find the person who knows the thing. Stand next to them. Pay attention. And it's why she's so good in a room full of strangers, and why the show kept using her for the jobs that needed somebody to walk into a place and read it fast. Aaron turns up in season 5 with a tin of applesauce and a photograph album, and he asks to speak to whoever's in charge, and the group beats him unconscious, which, honestly, is fair enough given the year they'd had. But it's worth sitting with the fact that Aaron is a man whose actual job is going out into the world, alone, watching strangers from a distance for days to see whether they're decent, and then walking up to them and offering them a home. That is the single most optimistic occupation available in this universe, and he does it voluntarily. He's right about them too. Alexandria works. It takes a long time, and it costs an enormous amount. But the thing Aaron was pitching in that field genuinely comes true, and he never once gets treated as the person who is right. The applesauce, by the way, is the tell. He offers it, and Rick makes him eat some first to prove it isn't poisoned. And Aaron does, and pulls a face, because it's applesauce, and he's an adult man. It's a tiny beat of comedy in an extremely tense scene, and it does more character work than most monologues. He loses an arm to an infection later, and builds himself a spiked prosthetic, which he then uses in combat for the rest of the series. And I don't think anybody ever fully processed how metal that is, for a man who was originally introduced as the nice one with the photo album. Enid is the shortest entry here, because her whole thing is compression. She gets written off as an angsty teenager for about 2 seasons. She sneaks out over the wall. She's rude to Carl, she won't explain herself. She runs away at inconvenient moments. Standard, difficult teen furniture. And then you find out what the letters mean. JSS. She'd been scratching it on things and writing it in condensation, and it turns out it stands for just survive somehow, and that she'd watched her parents get eaten at the side of a road, and then sat there and ate a sandwich because she was hungry and there was nothing else to do. That's her entire personality, explained in one flashback. She isn't sullen. She's a child running a survival protocol. What the show does with her afterwards is give her a job. She trains as a doctor under Siddiq, and there's something genuinely satisfying about the girl whose creed was just survive, somehow ending up as the person other people are carried to. She's very good at it too. Brisk, unsentimental, entirely willing to tell an adult to sit down and be quiet. Tara Chambler had, I'd argue, the worst possible introduction of anybody on this show. She arrives attached to the governor. Not just in the same storyline, she is his lieutenant. She's the one holding a rifle at the prison fence. She's standing there while he executes Herschel. There is genuinely no faster way to make an audience hate somebody than to put them in that frame. And she believed him. That's the thing. He turned up at her family's flat calling himself Brian, and she was a woman with a dying father and a sister and a small niece and no plan. And this competent stranger with a plan walked in. The show then spends about 4 years quietly making her one of the most decent people in it. She's funny first of all, which is rare here. She's the one who talks too much when she's nervous and makes bad jokes at funerals. She's the one who tells Glenn she's coming with him and then just does it. She goes to Oceanside, gets caught, is offered her life if she keeps their location secret, and then keeps it, against her own community's interest, for people who tried to kill her, because she gave her word. She ends up leading Hilltop, and then Alpha kills her and puts her head on a spike, which is the note this show tends to end things on. Sasha Williams is the one I'd argue got the least credit relative to what she was asked to carry. She arrives at the prison as part of a trio, loses her brother, loses the man she'd only just allowed herself to love, and spends 3 seasons being handed grief in installments. And she's a marksman and a strategist, and by the back half she's the person the group sends when a job needs doing quietly. And the plan she comes up with at the end of it is one of the boldest swings the show ever took. She lets herself be shut in a coffin and delivered to Negan as a hostage, having already taken a pill from Eugene, so that she'll come out of that box in the middle of his people rather than in front of them. It is, as a piece of tactical thinking, completely sound, and nobody else in that group would have got there. The episode intercuts the whole thing with a long, gentle hallucination on a train with Abraham, which shouldn't work at all and completely does. Jesus Pulrovia is the other one. He turns up as a pickpocket in a beard who steals a truck and then hangs off the back of it, and the group's first assessment of him is essentially irritating. Then it turns out he's the most capable hand-to-hand fighter in the entire universe, that he's spent months mapping every settlement in the region, and that he's been quietly maintaining diplomatic relations between communities that don't know the others exist. He also dies in about 4 seconds mid-turn in the fog, which is either brilliantly nasty or a waste depending on your mood. 2 quick additions to this list, both of whom got about a season and a half. Denise Cloyd was a psychiatrist who ended up being Alexandria's doctor because there wasn't anybody else, which is a fairly terrifying premise when you sit with it. She had panic attacks. She was openly, cheerfully bad at the job at first. And the reason she matters is that she's the only character in the entire run who is shown getting better at something by simply being frightened and doing it anyway, on screen in increments, reading the manual, practicing the sutures, throwing up afterwards. The reason people didn't take to her early was that she wasn't competent yet, and this show has never had much patience for people who aren't competent yet. Spencer Monroe, on the other hand, is a character I'd argue people were slightly too harsh on, and I say that knowing exactly how he ends up. He's the son of a politician, raised in a walled town, who watches his mother and his brother die, and then decides the man in charge is going to get everyone killed and that he should be in charge instead, which is, on the evidence available to him, not an unreasonable read. Rick had by that point lost a great many Alexandrians. Spencer's error wasn't the analysis, it was going to Negan with it, which is roughly the equivalent of settling a workplace dispute by writing to a shark. He gets disemboweled in the street for his trouble, and Negan gets a joke about guts out of it. And that's the last anybody thinks about Spencer Monroe. Anyway, here's a fun detail about the next lot. All 3 of them were, at one point or another, on the wrong side. There's a specific mood this show reaches for every so often, where somebody is introduced in a way that guarantees you'll hate them. And then over about 18 months, the whole thing gets gently walked back until you're not sure what you're supposed to feel anymore. It's one of the better things it does. Not always on purpose, mind you. Dwight gets introduced by robbing Daryl in a wood, and then, much later, by killing Denise with a crossbow bolt through the eye in the middle of a sentence. That's a hard hole to climb out of. Denise was lovely. She was a nervous doctor who had just, in that exact scene, finished a speech about pushing past her own fear, and the show killed her mid-word as a punchline. And the man who did it with Daryl's own crossbow, wearing Daryl's own vest, which is about as close to a personal insult as television gets. So people hated him, correctly. And then you find out what the burn on his face is. He ran. He took his wife and his sister-in-law, and he ran from the saviours, and when they were caught, Negan gave him a choice: join, and his sister-in-law gets the medicine she needs, and his wife becomes one of Negan's wives. He said yes, and then Negan pressed a hot iron to half his face anyway, as a receipt. Austin Emilio plays him as somebody who is already lost, which I think is the correct choice, and much harder than it looks. There's no swagger in him. Even when he's in charge of a situation, he's got the posture of a man waiting for the next thing to be taken. The show underlines the Daryl parallel maybe slightly too firmly. Same background, roughly, same instincts. One of them fell in with a group that made him better, and one of them fell in with a group that put an iron on his face. And the script does not trust you to notice this on your own. But the underlying idea holds, and Daryl's refusal to forgive him, which lasts basically forever, long past the point where everyone else has moved on, is one of the more honest bits of characterization in the back half. He survives the war, gets sent away, and eventually turns up over on Fear the Walking Dead looking for his wife, which is a very long way to travel for a character who was introduced stealing a motorbike. Jadis is the one where I think the reappraisal is genuinely enormous, and it happened almost entirely after the fact. Because in season 7 she is, let's be honest, a bit ridiculous. She turns up at the head of a group of people living in a rubbish dump. They all wear grey, they've adopted a truncated way of speaking that sounds like a Guy Ritchie film about mudlarks, and they communicate primarily in single words and long pauses. There is a sculpture garden, there is a cat made of scrap metal, it's a lot, and then she betrays everyone at the exact moment it matters most, which is the sort of thing a gimmick antagonist does before being written out. Except she wasn't, because Jadis turns out to be the single most consequential character in the entire franchise, and the show did not tell you that for about 2 years. The helicopter. That's the whole thing. She'd been trading people to an organisation flying black helicopters, marking them as A or B, and nobody watching had any idea what that meant. A is a person of interest. B is labour. That's it. 2 letters that turn out to encode the entire logic of the Civic Republic military. An organisation with a functioning city, an air force, and a policy of eradicating everyone who has seen too much. And she's the one who puts Rick Grimes on that helicopter. The show's lead character, blown up on a bridge, presumed dead by everyone he loves, is picked up off a riverbank by the woman from the rubbish dump and traded away as an A. The ones who live goes back and fills all of it in, and it changes almost everything about how she reads. She's called Anne there mostly. She's a former photographer, and the show reveals that she'd been visiting Gabriel over the years, keeping in touch with the one person who'd known her before, sitting in a church talking to a priest about whether she could live with what she'd done. At one point she pulls a gun on him and can't do it. So a character I initially wrote off as a costume decision turns out to be the connective tissue holding the whole universe together. I don't think there's a bigger swing in the entire franchise. Pollyanna McIntosh has talked about building the speech pattern deliberately. Incidentally, the idea being that the Junkyard group had been isolated long enough to develop their own compressed dialect, which is a perfectly sound piece of world building that simply landed oddly on a Sunday night. In retrospect, it reads much better than it did at the time, mainly because you now know she was performing a version of herself for her own people, in the same way that half the characters in this show are performing something. The other thing I'd note is how completely her position makes sense once you know about the helicopters. She wasn't a warlord with a dump. She was a woman running a very small settlement who had made contact with something enormous and well-armed, and had worked out that the only trade good it wanted was people. Every apparently deranged decision she makes in season 7 and 8 is a rational move in a game nobody else at the table knew was being played. Lydia belongs in this section too, and she's the one where the audience turned around fastest. She's introduced as an enemy asset. Alpha's daughter, captured, brought inside the walls, and for a while the show plays it as though she might be a plant, feeding her lines that could go either way, letting the hilltop lot argue about whether she's a prisoner or a guest. And a decent chunk of the audience assumed the worst, partly because she'd been raised by the woman wearing a face. Then you get the flashbacks, and the flashbacks are rewritten as you watch them. The first version she tells is one where her father was cruel and her mother protected her. The true version is the exact inverse. She'd built a false memory because the real one was unmanageable, which is a genuinely clever thing for a horror show to try, and it lands. She never becomes cuddly about it either, which I appreciate. She's prickly and difficult, and she keeps making choices that put her at risk. And when she finally stands up to her mother, the scene isn't triumphant. It's just exhausting for everyone in it. Cassidy McClincy played her with a permanent guardedness that never fully switches off, even years later when she's ostensibly safe. Also worth mentioning, Dwight's wife Sherry. Since we glossed over her, she's the one who actually took the deal. She married Negan so that Dwight would be spared and her sister would get treatment. Then she let Daryl out of his cell, which is the act that starts the entire collapse of the Saviours, and then she ran. So the pivotal act of sabotage in that whole war was carried out by a woman most of the audience could not have named at the time. Nicholas, meanwhile, gets the shortest entry here, deliberately. He's a coward from Alexandria. He panics in the field, he abandons people, and he gets Noah killed in a revolving door in one of the most upsetting deaths this show ever filmed. The camera stays on Glenn's face on the other side of the glass watching, unable to do anything. So when the group is running a herd through a town, and Nicholas freezes on a rooftop and shoots himself, and takes Glenn down into the crowd with him, the reaction was not sympathy. But the thing is, the years of argument that followed were never really about Nicholas at all. They were about the dumpster. Glenn goes under the crowd, we see viscera, everyone assumes he's dead, and then he isn't. And the show sat on that for 3 whole episodes, while the internet ate itself. That fake-out is still cited as the moment a large chunk of the audience stopped fully trusting the programme, which is a strange legacy for a minor character to carry. Nicholas is remembered less for anything he did than for being standing next to somebody at the moment the show broke a promise. Poor bloke never had a chance, which leaves the 2 biggest ones. And I've got opinions on both. I'll say up front that this section is going to be a bit less generous than the others, so it doesn't land as a surprise later. Negan is the character people were wrong about in both directions at once, which is a rare achievement. Direction 1, the people who insisted he was irredeemable and that the show should never have tried. Direction 2, the people who watched the lineup, watched the speech, watched a man beat 2 beloved characters to death with a baseball bat, and came away thinking he had a point. I'm not going to sit here and argue the second one out point by point, mostly because there are about 400 videos on this website already doing exactly that, and I'd rather not do essay homework at 11:30 at night. What interests me is why that reading exists at all, because I don't think it's really about politics. I think it's about direction. There's a mismatch from his very first appearance between what the script is telling you and what the camera is doing. The dialogue says tyrant, the staging says rock star. He arrives at night in headlights with 100 people falling silent, and he gets a slow walk and a leather jacket and about 6 minutes of uninterrupted material before anything happens. That is how you shoot somebody the audience is supposed to enjoy, and they did enjoy him immediately. He is, by an enormous margin, the funniest thing this show ever put on screen, and the writing knows it and keeps feeding him. So you end up with a programme asking you to be appalled by a man it has spent every technical resource making you look forward to. That's not a moral failure in the audience. That's a tonal problem in the production, and I think a lot of the argument that grew up around him is really people trying to reconcile 2 things. The show never quite reconciled itself. The season 6 finale is where the misreading properly set in, and it wasn't about him at all. Ending on his point of view the bat coming down, the camera going red, and then nothing for 6 months was a decision about scheduling and publicity rather than storytelling, and an enormous number of viewers who had been perfectly happy up to that point decided they were finished. Then they attached the feeling to the man on screen, because he was the thing they'd been looking at when it happened, which is a bit like blaming the doorman. He turned up, did his job extremely well, and got the reputation of the whole building. Now the other direction, which I think is the more interesting error, because I was fairly certain, around season 8, that this character was finished. Not the actor, the character. I thought the show had written itself into a hole where the man who killed Glenn and Abraham could never again be in a scene without the whole thing curdling. And then the show kept him alive in a cell for years and just let him sit there. What rescues him, in my view, is almost entirely Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who is doing something quite specific and quite difficult. He plays Negan as a man performing Negan. There's always a slight gap between the swagger in the eyes, and the whole late series arc works because that gap was there from the very first scene. You go back to the lineup and watch it again, knowing what you know, and it's a man doing a bit that has got completely out of hand. The Maggie material is where the show earns it or doesn't, and opinions vary wildly. She is not required to forgive him, and the writing never asks her to, which I appreciate. Dead City is essentially two people who cannot be in a room together, being forced into a ruined Manhattan, and it works precisely because the wound is never treated as closed. Fun detail on the trajectory. The most hated character this franchise ever produced is now a lead with his name on a spin-off. That's not a redemption arc, that's a business decision that happened to align with one. The backstory episode is worth a mention because it changed a lot of minds, and I'm still slightly suspicious of how it did it. Before all this, he was a school teacher. Not a good husband, by his own account. He'd cheated repeatedly, and he was still doing it when his wife got ill. And then she got ill, and he stopped, and he sat with her through the whole thing, and the world ended in the middle of her treatment. The bat is named after her. That's where Lucille comes from. And when she died, he couldn't do the thing that has to be done afterwards. So he ran away from the house and left her, and he had to go back later. It's effective writing, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan is extremely good in it. My hesitation is just that it's a very familiar shape. The villain's origin as a bereavement, and the show reaches for it at precisely the moment it needs you to soften. I don't think it excuses anything. I do think it explains where the performance came from, which is a man who decided that the version of himself who couldn't act was worse than any version who could. The other thing worth saying is how little screen time it actually took to turn him around. People talk about the redemption as though it were a long campaign, but the cell years are mostly silence. He's in the corner of other people's episodes, reading, sanding a chess piece, saying something unhelpful through the bars. The show didn't argue him back into the fold. It just kept him in shot until the audience got used to him being there, which is a slightly cynical technique, and it worked perfectly. Right, Judith Grimes should not exist, statistically, medically, narratively, a baby born in a boiler room, no doctor, no formula, into a prison, under siege. The show even had a ready-made off-ramp, because in the comics she doesn't survive the prison at all. She dies in her mother's arms, so a fair few people watched season 4 expecting her to be a plot device, with a countdown on it. There was a whole cohort of viewers who treated her as a liability the writers would eventually cash in for a shock, and I confess I was one of them. Every time somebody left her alone with a bottle, I braced. She just kept not dying. Then the time jump happens, 6 years pass, and the show introduces the version of her that everyone remembers. She's about 10. She's got her father's hat. She's carrying Michonne's sword, which she's not tall enough for, and uses anyway. She rides out to meet strangers at the gate, and negotiates with them herself. And she's completely unbothered by the fact that she is a child doing this. Kaylee Fleming plays her without a single note of stage school cuteness, which is the whole reason it works. She's just matter of fact. This is the world, these are the rules, I've read the paperwork. The lovely part is that she inherits both of her parents' arguments, and she doesn't resolve them, she just carries them around. From Rick, the insistence on bringing people in, and the belief that the group is the thing worth building. From Michonne, the sword and the wariness. From Laurie, though nobody ever says it out loud, the willingness to tell whoever's in charge that they've got it wrong. She's the only major character who has no memory of the world before. Everyone else is measuring the apocalypse against something. She isn't. And that turns out to be an advantage, because she has no nostalgia to be exploited, and no old life to grieve. Her brother is worth a detour here, because Carl Grimes has the exact same shape of misreading attached to him, and it's older. For a good while, the entire internet had one joke about Carl, and it was some variation on being told to stay in the house, and immediately not staying in the house. That was the whole cultural footprint of the character, a boy who wanders off and causes problems. And it's not that it's untrue. He does wander off. He gets Dale killed more or less by winding up a walker in a swamp and leaving it there. He's a nightmare, but the show is running an argument through him about whether a person raised inside all this can come out of it as anything. He shoots his own mother in a boiler room at 12. He learns to use a rifle before he's learned long division. Chandler Riggs, incidentally, was on this show from the age of 10 to 18, which is a strange thing to have done with your childhood, and it's why the early performance and the late one barely look like the same actor. The relationship with Negan is the one that does the most work, and I'd not expected it to, because she's the only person in that community with no memory of what he did. She wasn't at the lineup. She's heard about it, obviously, the way you hear about a war that finished before you were born. So when she finds him living out in the woods, she treats him as somebody who might be useful, which is exactly how her father would have handled it, and exactly what her mother would have warned her against. And then she works out who he is and stops speaking to him, and the show lets that stand for a long time rather than resolving it in an episode. There's also the dog, which is called Dog, and belonged to Daryl, and is one of the very few characters in this franchise who gets an unambiguously good outcome. And her brother RJ, named after their father, who is another child born into a world that has already ended, and who therefore has no baseline either. Ending on her feels right, and not because it's uplifting exactly. It's because after all that time watching adults be wrong about each other, the child who was written off as a bad idea turns out to be the one holding the sword and the hat and most of the argument. Before we wrap up though, a quick word about the people we were actually right about. Not everything got overturned on appeal. Some of the convictions were sound. Gregory is the purest example, leader of Hilltop, and a man whose entire personality is finding out which way the wind is blowing and then standing in it. He can't remember anyone's name. He calls Maggie by a different name every time she's in the room, which starts as a gag and becomes genuinely insulting. He tries to sell out his own people to the Saviours, fails at that, tries to have Maggie killed, fails at that, and then gets hanged for it. There is no hidden depth there. There was never going to be. He's a middle manager with a decanter, and I find him weirdly delightful. For exactly that reason, every ensemble needs one person who is small in a completely recognisable way. Sebastian Milton is Gregory with money, the Commonwealth's governor's son, a whining, entitled young man who orders people around, sends workers into a walker-infested basement to fetch his family's cash, and lies immediately whenever anything goes wrong. Nobody at any point was wrong about Sebastian. He was written to be loathed, and the show delivered on it precisely. Lance Hornsby at least had ambition, which is more than the other two managed, but the smiling administrator act was transparent from about his third scene. Pleasant, helpful, deeply invested in your success, entirely willing to have your town starve to make a point. Ron Anderson is the awkward one, because he was a teenager who had just watched his father die, and there's a version of that story with more sympathy in it. But he spends his last stretch trying to shoot Carl, and the show wasn't especially interested in complicating him. And Ed Pelletier we've already covered by implication. 2 episodes, no ambiguity, and one of the few deaths this show ever staged that was designed purely to satisfy. Simon is the interesting exception in this group, because he's the one where the actor's work outran the writing. Stephen Ogg played the Saviour's second-in-command as somebody enjoying himself enormously, all wide grins and cheerful menace, and audiences loved watching him precisely because they were never asked to sympathise with him. He wipes out an entire community against orders and then lies about it badly. Nobody was wrong about Simon. People simply liked having him around, which is a different thing. The Governor is the one I'd put in the awkward middle. Season 3 had him as a genuine piece of work, with a tank and a wall of heads in jars, and the audience was entirely correct about that. Then Season 4 gave him 2 consecutive bottle episodes, attempting a second life under a different name, and by then everyone had comprehensively moved on. It's a rare case of a show trying to complicate a villain, and the audience simply declining the offer. I have a small amount of sympathy for that experiment, actually. It was ambitious. It just arrived about 8 months after everybody had finished the argument. So the fandom's instincts weren't broken. That's the point of listing them, really. If everybody had been wrong about everybody, the reappraisals wouldn't be interesting. It's the fact that the audience got most of it right that makes the misfires worth going back over. Now the other half of this, which I think about more than I probably should, all of these arguments happen to real people. We've already touched on the death threats over a fictional priest, so I won't go over it again, but scale it up. Every one of these performances was somebody's job, and a decent number of them involved going to a convention hall 3 weekends a year and standing in front of the people who'd been writing about you. There's a particular kind of story that comes out of this era of television, where an actor describes being approached in an airport or a supermarket by a stranger who wanted to tell them, personally, unprompted, how much they hated them. Not the character, them. And it's fascinating to me how often the same actors describe it with something close to good humour. The general view seems to be that a strong reaction is better than none, and that if the audience is arguing about your character in a car park, the work landed. The gendered pattern we talked about at the start turns up here too, in the actual data of it. Different letters from men than from women about the same character, in the same season. That's not really a fandom quirk. That's a fairly clean look at what people expect from mothers and what they expect from fathers. There's a practical side to it as well, that I hadn't thought about until fairly recently. Being on a show like this is not a stable job. Every actor on that call sheet knew that any script could be the one, and several of them have described the specific ritual of being asked to a private meeting with the showrunner, which everyone on set understood to mean one thing. You go in, you get told, and then you have to go back out and be normal for another 6 weeks of filming without telling anybody. Sarah Wayne Callies kept her own ending quiet for about 5 months. She gave interviews in that window where she was asked directly what it would be like when the day came, and she simply lied about it, which she's since described, with some amusement, as being part of the job description. And there's another layer that only really surfaced later, once people felt able to talk about their working lives more openly. Callies has spoken in recent years about earlier sets she'd been on, where the environment was genuinely hostile, an actor spitting in her face on a previous show, nights spent talking her husband out of going and having words with somebody. She's been fairly careful to distinguish between productions, and the point isn't to indict any one set. It's that the people we were all so confident about in comment sections were doing a demanding job in an industry with its own separate difficulties, and none of that was visible from where we were sitting. What's genuinely nice is where it all ended up, The convention circuit for this show is enormous, and it has been running for well over a decade, and the actors who played the most detested characters get some of the warmest receptions in the room now. Time did the work. People rewatched or grew up, or simply got far enough away from the argument to notice they'd been shouting at a woman doing laundry in a quarry. I don't think there's a tidy conclusion to any of this, and I'm not going to invent one. The honest version is that a show running for 11 years is going to generate opinions that were formed in year 2 and never updated, because nobody goes back and audits what they think about a television programme. You decide someone's annoying in 2011, and then you carry that around for a decade like a receipt in a coat pocket. What I've enjoyed going back through it is how pleasant it is to be wrong about this sort of thing. There's no cost. Nobody's waiting for an apology. You just watch an episode you half remember. Notice that the character you'd written off is doing something quite reasonable, and adjust. There's plenty left, mind you. I haven't touched the Whisperers, or Alpha and Lydia, or the whole strange business of the Commonwealth. The spin-offs have produced a fair few characters people made their minds up about far too quickly. Laurent, Isabel, the Croat, the entire population of Dead City. And there's a whole separate conversation to be had about the gaps between the comics and the show, which is where half of these misreadings started in the first place. Some other time, probably. For now, if you're still awake, I hope this was decent company. And if you're not, well, it'll all still be here.